Am I live? All right. Hey, good morning from Fossil Creek Tree Farm. Wanted to apologize that we had to cancel this class on Saturday. We had 30 mile an hour, 40, 50 mile an hour winds on Saturday. So we wanted to make sure that you guys were able to hear the content. So this morning, Max will be talking about fruit trees. I know it's a big project that a lot of people are working on, putting in gardens in their yards and also creating their own, fruit trees and orchards and stuff in their own homes so that you can start harvesting your own food. We want to make sure that you are very successful with that in North Texas because, as you guys know that live in Texas, our soil is not as amazing as people from Georgia, Nashville, and even Austin, other parts in our own state. So with that said, welcome Max.
Okay, we will not only cover fruit trees, we'll cover berries and just assorted odd things. And we have some odd things. First of all, one of the things that you need to be concerned with on fruit trees is chilling hours. And that's not freezing temperatures, that's temperatures below 45 degrees. And that communicates to fruit trees when to do their thing. So you need to have fruit trees that are appropriate for the amount of chilling hours that you have. I don't know how they do it, but they can count them. And they have to have enough chilling hours to complete their chilling requirement, and then when it warms up, they get started. If they're something like cherries, here we typically don't have enough chilling hours for cherries. So if you want a cherry tree, it's going to be pretty much ornamental. You can't really do cherries for fruit here. Also, apricots, it's another tree that you could get a crop here, but it's averages about 1 out of every 5 years. So they're pretty trees, ornamental and tough, but they don't fruit dependably. And of course, walnuts, and I'm getting through the ones that you just don't want to bother with. Walnuts, they're not really going to perform here either. We do a good job with pecans. If you want a nut tree, pecans are the way to go. Forget about walnuts. We're zone 8, which is the average coldest temperature in the winter is going to be 10 to 20 degrees. But the chilling hours, that's a requirement. There are fruit trees out there, like cherries, that require more than we have. And then there are varieties of apples that you could actually grow in Houston that have like a 200 to 400 hour chilling requirement. And you wouldn't want to do those here, because after they get in their chilling requirement, the next time it warms up, they come on out and do their thing. And typically what's going to happen with something like that is it's going to bloom, and here typically it's going to get frozen and not have any fruit. So you want them to do their thing on time, not too early, not too late. And we can grow, some people come in and say, can we actually do apples here? We can. We can do apples, peaches, pears, plums, figs, blackberries, olives, citrus here. We can do them, but they're going to be a container tree, because pretty much every winter we're going to have temperatures that would either kill or seriously damage a citrus tree if it was planted outside. This year winter was kind of canceled, so they might have been okay, but last year we had 2 nights, I think, in a row that got to 10 degrees. That would do them in. So You can do citrus here, but there'll be a container plant. We can also do blueberries, but they're going to require you almost have to plant them like you do azaleas. They want a real acidic soil, humusy, which is the opposite of what we have. So typically they're either done in a really big pot or in a raised bed, where you can make the kind of soil that they require. Let's see. We can also do pomegranates and persimmons. So we have a broad range of things that we can do. And today I said we were going to have some kind of strange things. I'll show you that one first. I don't know if you can see it, but it's got little red fruit. Not all of them are ripe yet, but this is a Agnes. It's actually used as a big hedge plant, big screen. They'll go 10 feet. They've got kind of a grayish leaf, but the berries, this is not really something that most people know or that really attracts people, but they do put on a little red berry. Ripens this time of year. It's edible. Unfortunately, the seed's almost as big as the berry. If you had a ton of them, you could make jam out of it, but and they've got a different kind of leaf. It looks like, a lot of people look at it and ask if it has scale. Nope, that's the way they look. It's kind of a dusty grayish color on the new leaves. And some people love the way they look and some people don't. The people that like the way they look call them Agnes, and the people that don't like the way they look call them Ugly Agnes. So I like them, but that's a personal deal. I've already eaten a few this morning.
Max, are you going to talk about pecan trees?
Yes.
Okay.
And since we've had a mention, we'll talk about pecans. They are one of the things that they're pollinated by the wind, and they put out a lot of pollen. We have a couple varieties, actually probably three, but two desirable in Wichita that are recommended for this area, and those do a really good job of pollinating each other. A lot of times if you have a single pecan tree, you know, you're still going to have pecans because there are pecan trees all over the place, and they put out a ton of pollen, and days like we've had recently with a lot of wind, it spreads that pollen everywhere. So it makes it a little more dependable, and you might get a little bit better crop if you've got a couple varieties that pollinate each other well.
Is there a best time here to plant pecan?
Well, the ones we have are container grown, so you can plant them anytime, but here, as with most things, the further ahead of July that you can get something in the ground, the better, because particular to where we live, Zone 8, the winters are typically pretty mild, and especially things that are deciduous like fruit trees, the winter is just a day at the beach. You know, they're never going to be hurt by the winter. The stressful time for trees, and that includes fruit trees, is July, August, September, when it's really hot, dry. We can have really windy days. You know, that's stressful. So the further ahead of that you get the plants in the ground to get their roots underway, the better they're going to be prepared to endure the hot summer here. So, and that's pretty much overall, that's the way it would go.
Okay, and then one more on pecan trees. What do you think about plantings from
an actual pecan?
If you're a very young person or a very patient person, that's okay, because a native pecan that grows up, and I've got several in my yard, that comes up from a pecan in the ground planted by your favorite squirrel, That thing could take 20 or 25 years to have pecans. So I've got one in my yard. I've let it grow. It's probably got a 4 or 5 inch caliper now, and it's been there for 10 or 15 years. I haven't even seen the hint of a pecan from it. The pecan trees we have are typically the pecan trees pretty much that you see sold everywhere. They are grafted, and you'll be able to see the graft down there. You know, they have just native type pecans that they grow, and that's going to provide the rootstock. And then they're going to graft a name variety onto that rootstock. That one will, the first pecan tree I planted eons ago when I was 15 in my mother's yard, the first spring it had 1 pecan. It was a grafted tree, paper shell pecan. The thing is, the wood that they graft onto there, that's from a mature tree. So it already thinks it's 45 years old because it probably came from a tree that's 45 or 50 years old. So it'll bear immediately. The native pecans, you know, they make a good tough tree, a good shade tree, but if you're looking for pecans, you'd want to get a grafted variety, which is typically what you're going to see. And they're fairly quick growing and make a pretty big tree. Spacing on those, you're going to want those to be 40 to 50 feet apart if you're doing more than one. But since we mentioned spacing, I'll just run through the trees and give some statistics so you can bear that in mind. On spacing on the trees, apples will be 25 to 30 feet apart, and I'm talking from what we call OC or on center, the center or where you have the trunk of one to where the trunk of the other one is, and that's going to be 25 or 30 feet. Figs be 15 to 20, peaches 18 to 25, pears 25 to 30, plums 15 to 18, persimmons 15 to 25. We have on persimmons, we have Eureka, which is a really good variety, but it's on the smaller side. So it would be one of those 15 feet apart kind of guys. Pomegranates, 10 to 15. Olives, which we have one variety, they'd be 25 feet apart. Pecans, we already mentioned, 40 to 50 feet. We're also going to talk about berries, like blackberries. They would be 3 to 4 feet apart, and if you had more than one row, the rows would be 8 to 10 feet apart. Blueberries, about 8 feet apart. And citrus trees, if you're arranging the containers out there, they could get big enough to where you would want to have them 12 feet apart. Of course, the next most common question is about fruit is, will I need more than one variety for pollination? Most of the things we have, you wouldn't need a pollinator. I'll kind of go through them now. The apples, it's good to have a pollinator. One of the varieties that we have over here is a Molly's Delicious, and that's probably one of the top recommended apples for this area. And the other good thing is that it's an extremely good pollinator for other apples. So it kind of satisfies two things. Figs, they're also fruitful, no problem. Peaches, they're also fruitful. Pears, they can sometimes bear okay without a pollinator, but it's always going to be better if you do have a pollinator. And that's another one that there may be pear trees in the area that would help you out. Plums, that's one that it's good to have a pollinator, but there are varieties that are so fruitful. Methley is so fruitful, and if you were going to plant only one plum tree, Methley would be the one that I'd recommend. I think we also have Ozark Premier, and it's also so fruitful. It never hurts to have two varieties. It's not going to bother anything, but those are self-fruitful. Persimmons are self-fruitful. Pomegranates, self-fruitful. Olives, self-fruitful. And we talked about pecans. It helps to have a pollinator. Blackberries, they're self-fruitful. And blueberries, it's good to have a pollinator. We have Premier, and I think we just ran out of Austin. Those two varieties, I think I have a Premier bush here, but those two varieties are really good at pollinating each other. Citrus trees are self-fruitful, and we're supposed to, I've got a lime here. I think we're supposed to get Meyer lemon in this week.
Yes.
It's very popular, and one of the neat things about Meyer lemon that, you know, it's a little trivia thing, it's claim to fame, which is unusual, but it can have significant fruit on the tree, and it will also at the same time put on a bunch of additional blooms, which is kind of neat because the blooms are very fragrant and pretty. And of course you can see the lime we have, it's just covered in blooms right now, so they typically set a bunch of fruit just like the Meyer lemon.
Hey, I'm sorry, on the fig trees, have you talked about that one yet?
Yeah,
Can they tolerate winter here?
yes. The ones we have, there are some fig trees, depends on the variety. They could potentially be hurt by the winter, especially if, and some of the varieties are just recommended for the Gulf Coast area because they're not as winter hardy. The ones we have a Celeste, which is probably the most winter hardy fig, and is dependable here. Typically doesn't get hurt at all. We also have brown turkey, which is also referred to as Texas everbearing. The Celeste has a little bit smaller fig, real good flavor, you know, a very tough plant. The Texas everbearing, a little bit medium-sized fig, and everbearing, it has a long season that it will produce figs through the summer. So that's another reason why it's popular, but those are both going to be winter hardy here. If, you know, the worst were to happen, if a fig gets damaged, it could die back some. Typically around here they don't, but they pop back from it really quick. And so fruitful, and of course, we, you know, here in a little bit, probably late spring or early summer, any of the fig trees that we still have left, they're going to have figs on them. It's not unusual to be able to buy a fig that already has a crop started. Of course, we'll do some more statistics, and then we'll kind of talk about some individual plants. But along with pollinators, the next biggest question people have is, how long will it be till I have a crop? And the figures I'm giving you here are to have a significant crop. A lot of the fruits, you know, they can bear right away. It'd be kind of a smattering of fruit, and a lot of them you really don't want them to do it anyway. You know, like if you had a peach tree, you don't want to let it set any peaches for the first couple years. Same on a plum. You want them to put their energy into growing a tree, because to producing fruit, you know, they're putting resources and it's putting a strain on the plant to do that. So the first couple years, you just want them to put their energies into becoming established, not bearing crop. But apples be 3 to 4 years, figs 2 to 3 years, peaches 3 years, pears could be 4 to 5, could be longer. Plums 2 to 3, these are pretty quick numbers. Persimmons 4 years, pomegranates 4 years, olives 3 or 4 years. Pecans 6 to 10. Blackberries a couple years. Blueberries 3 or 4 years. Citrus, significant crop, maybe 4 or 5 years, but you're going to do them in a container, so you could have some fruit right away on those. And then along with the question of fruiting, some of the fruit trees are going to need to be thinned, and they will set more fruit. Actually, say like on a peach tree, the 3rd year, it's going to set more fruit than you want to leave on the tree. So thinning, you're going to want on a peach tree for there to be 6 inches between peaches. Did I say that right? 6 inches between peaches. And figs, typically you don't have to worry. Apple or peaches 6 to 7 inches. Apples 6 inches between them. Pears 5 to 7 inches. Plums 4 to 5 inches. Typically you don't need to do it on persimmons or pomegranates. Typically you don't have to thin. Olives you wouldn't have to thin. Pecans no. Blackberries and blueberries no. And citrus, maybe if it put on just an absolute ton, you could thin some just because of the sheer weight of it. But I can show you now that and we haven't done it, but to give you an example, I think we've got one here. And this peach tree. See, this guy's still in a 3-gallon pot, and on this one branch here, it started off with 4 peaches, and these have got about 2 inches between them, and this one here, there's about a ½ an inch in between them. So obviously, you would thin those. If this were later on, you would take this guy off, and this guy, and there you're going to have about 6 inches between the peaches. That's what you're going to shoot for, because peaches, they will put enough fruit on. 2 reasons for thinning it. Number one, typically a peach can put on enough fruit that if you left it all, it would put so much weight on the tree that it could break the whole tree to the ground and destroy it. Of course, the other thing is the peaches would all be small. There might be a ton of them, but they would all be small. When you thin them, that way you get full-size peaches, and that's going to restrict the amount of weight on the tree, so it's not going to destroy itself. And same thing on plums. We also have, I don't know if I mentioned, this is the first year that we've had them. We have avocado trees. I don't have much experience with avocado trees, but this guy, they say zone 8, cold hardy 10 to 20 degrees. So, and this is a variety Fantastic. It says it can reach 25 feet tall, 20 feet wide, very cold hardy. So we're in the new territory on that one. But if you're looking for sheer dependability, that they're absolutely going to do it and they're going to be really happy here, you can't do better than blackberries. They're adapted to our soil and climate. They bear fruit quickly, a pretty good crop. We've got, and these that we have are thornless, so when you go to pick the berries, you're not going to bleed. We've got two of the good varieties recommended for the area. Cachita, and and I may mispronounce that, but we're going to press on. And Natchez. Those are two varieties really recommended for here. And thing to remember on blackberries is after these canes bear fruit, they're done. So as you're picking the last fruit off of them, soon after that, they'll look like they're going into decline, and they are. It's not something you're doing wrong. Those canes are done. So when they are really fading out, by that time, you'll see new canes coming up. And those are what are going to bear fruit next year. And they will come up really strong and quick. When they're doing that and the old ones are fading, you can cut the old ones off at the ground. And then as the new ones get some height, you can do some tip pruning to help them branch and bush better. But the neat thing about blackberries and blueberries are the same way. The crop doesn't ripen all at one time. You know, you'll have clusters of berries, and some of the berries are ready and some aren't. So you can go there and pick the ones that are ready and ripe, and the others will continue to ripen on the plant. And that way you don't have to worry about storage or what you're going to do with them all. You can kind of eat them as they ripen, which is a neat thing. I did mention blueberries, and here we have one. He's blooming up a storm. This is Premier, which is a recommended variety for here, and we've had these for years. And I've tasted them. They bear them here in the store, and I give them a thumbs up. And I'm pretty picky about blueberries. I ate them when I was a kid, wild from the woods. So I'm hard to please. And when we had these years ago, first got them, and they ripened, and they're pretty good size blueberries. So I was skeptical, and I tasted them, and they're the real deal. But they require a little more effort because they don't like our soil. They like the opposite of what we have. So you can do either a real big pot or a raised bed works well. A good idea to make it at least 2 feet by 2 feet, and it'd be nice if it was 2 feet deep, but you'd use aged compost of pine bark, sphagnum peat, and you could do a little coarse sand, but the most important thing are the sphagnum peat and the aged pine bark. That's going to be a real acidic situation. Of course, another plus about blueberries, they have really pretty fall color. As far as shrubs that have fall color, they're probably at the top of the list. Pinks, yellows, reds, really pretty foliage. And of course, if you're going to do fruit, one of the things that varies quite a bit is the amount of participation required from you. Some of those that have the least, figs pretty self-sufficient, don't require a whole lot of fertility, don't have a whole lot in the way of pests. Pears, same thing, don't need a whole lot of fertility, don't get that many diseases or insect problems, and a very pretty tree and live for a long time. You can see, old homesteads where the house is gone, but the pear trees are still there. Peaches and plums, those are kind of the higher maintenance requirements. Apples, not quite as bad, but you'll need to pay attention to those. And the thing that you'd want to get on those is, here's a little fruit and nut resources from Texas A&M, and you can go online, and of course they have a bunch of information on the different fruits. Of course, one of the things to remember on these, that some of what they're talking about will be referred to commercial growing, which won't apply to the homeowner, but they'll still give you a bunch of valuable information for what you're doing in your yard. They've got, we've got blackberries and blueberries. And of course, when you go on that, the site, they have some things on there that are obsolete. I think they've got one on there like the spray schedule for apples and peaches. That one's obsolete. They've got a bunch of stuff on there that's not on the market yet and are still. And then some of these too will refer to insecticides that are, you know, for commercial growers. They're really expensive, and you know, you wouldn't really be able to find them, and if you did, the price would discourage you. But they will also, if you get the ones that are pointed toward the individual fruit, most of those have got homeowner useful information on also on the sprays. They're up to date. So they've got peaches and apples, even have olives. The one we have here, the Arbequina, that's the most planted olive in the state of Texas. It's of course so fruitful, and that one is used for, makes a good quality olive oil. And I think a lot of the people that end up buying them here, they make a neat looking tree. You know, they're not real big. They could do 10 to 15 feet, but they have a really neat kind of a grayish cast to them, a really attractive tree. It looks like it really fits into the Southwest look. They've got one on pomegranates, persimmons, and I know for a fact persimmons really do, because about 3 blocks down the road from me in my neighborhood, there's a person that's got a persimmon tree in their backyard. It's about 25 feet wide, and the last 2 or 3 years when I look at it, it must have 200 persimmons on it. And of course, as far as ornamental is concerned, the fruit ripens in the fall, and then the persimmons lose their foliage, and they've got all the ripe fruit hanging on the tree. So a bare tree, no leaves, but fruit all over it. And they store well on the tree, so there's no urgency of getting them off the tree. And of course, improved pecans, and then plums, nectarines, apricots. Of course, if you're wondering what really what a nectarine is, it's a mutated peach. It's not a combination of other fruits. It's just a peach with no fuzz. So, and then pears. So they all do well here. It's just according to how much participation you want to put in. And of course, we also have, I didn't mention on the figs, we also have, this one's a little dwarf. I think they get like 4 to 6 feet. And you can remember the name. It's Little Miss Figgy. And let me see. We'll double check. That's a USDA Zone 7. So that one would certainly be reliably hardy here. And of course, they're deciduous. Of course, one of the other things that I really like about figs is you can see this just beginning to put their foliage on, but they have pretty big leaves, pretty dramatic. So just as a landscape feature, I think they're really make a contribution. You know, I like things with big, bold foliage, and figs are certainly in the group. And of course, and this one, the pomegranate. This is wonderful. You can see they're just starting to leaf out. You know, a tough plant, they'll get 10 feet by 10 feet. They're another one that just the appearance of the shrubs makes a contribution to the landscape. And for food, we've got this one covers it, fruit, citrus, and pecan tree food. And also for pecans, they like additional zinc sulfate. So you can do this in the soil and as a foliar spray. But be careful, that's for pecan trees, because if you have a peach tree nearby, it will kill it. So don't spray it on a peach tree thinking, well, if it's good for a pecan tree, I bet it'd help the peach too. Nope, specific to pecan trees. And of course, as far as planting, when you're doing the young fruit trees, if it's out in your yard, they don't like to have grass around them. Most turf around here is Bermuda, which is a aggressive, heavy feeding grass. It goes in there and competes for moisture and nutrients. So you'd want to have a 4 to 6 foot diameter saucer around there, and I'd use hardwood mulch on that. You know, 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Deters weeds, insulates the soil from heat, and conserves moisture. And of course, all the as far as mixing something in, you know, we've got planter's mix, which is a mix of aged pine bark, sphagnum peat, and some compost. So that you could mix in with the existing soil. I would still plant or put mostly your native soil back into the hole. You'd use a little bit of that to loosen it up some, but mostly native soil in the hole. And of course, if you were going to do in a big pot for like a citrus tree, you know, you could just use a straight planter's mix. And then, of course, in planting the tree, you would want to, there we go. You want the, we've maxed out the height, but the top of the soil of the root ball, you want that at or a little above grade. You don't want it to be below, and you don't want to put any mulch up around the trunk. In spite of what you've seen at landscapes around, you don't want any mulch up around the trunk of pretty much anything. That's for air circulation. Your mulch would be out over the root zone. And I like hardwood mulch because it breaks down and adds to the soil. You need to replace it at least once a year, because if you put 1.5 inches or so on there, when you go back in a year, it's going to have broken down and actually be part of the soil, which is a good thing, but you'd need to replenish the mulch about once a year at least. You could do it twice a year, but absolutely at least once a year. And of course, as with everything here, going into the summer, I mentioned that's going to be the tough time for plants. It's not unusual for us to do 2 months in the summer and maybe get 1 inch of rain, you know, during that 2-month period. Typically, fruit trees are going to want the equivalent of 1 inch of rainfall per week. So that will kind of give you a guide. Of course, the other thing on them that typically you've got is, since they're new trees and hopefully blowing and going, they're going to have new growth. You're going to have soft leaves on there. And if we have the weather forecast says, you know, it's going to be hot, the wind's going to blow 20 miles an hour all day long. If you haven't just watered, you're probably going to be due for some water on your fruit trees probably by the end of a day like that. The kind of the canary in the coal mine, since they have new growth and soft leaves, if you look out there and the leaves are kind of pale and or they're wilting over, that probably means they're in need of a drink. You give them a good drink, in an hour or two, they'll be right back up. So you confirm they were thirsty, and then at that time you kind of think back, when was the last time you gave them water? And that gives you a ballpark of how long they're going to make it between waterings. So that'll give you an idea. But of course, the neat thing about fruit trees that they contribute, along with gardens and the other things around your home, the look of abundance is really appealing. And there isn't much that you can have in your yard that gives a more dramatic visual impression of abundance as a fruit tree. You know, there's a house I drive by on my way to work. They've got a big pear tree, and I think I first noticed it 3 or 4 years ago, and it was just covered with pears, and it's just an immediate dramatic appeal that nothing says that you've got it going on as much as, you know, a pear tree with a bunch of fruit on it. So I think we kind of covered it. If there are any questions?
No, you're good. If they have any questions, they can reply to Facebook.
And I'll get back to you.
Yep.
Okay?
You good? All right.
We're good.
Thanks, Max.
You bet.